The first thing I would like to say about the, painting waves, it's important to see them as a three-dimensional and moving object, and also translucent object. So all these three things is kind of, making it not so easy, because it's very hard at any given moment. Like if you try to do plein air while you're at the beach, it's very hard. So the best you can do usually is just kind of, catch some colors and get a general idea of the wave. And it is very valuable experience, because when we take pictures, color just, does not quite look the same in a photo, and values sometimes get very dark or very light. So it is very important to observe it, but as far as, getting understanding of the form, it's actually very helpful to take some videos, even like short videos, and just observe it at any given time, how the wave changes. Because, this iconic kind of shape, it's not always like this, but I'm sorry?
I'm sorry.
Someone's asking a question?
No.
Okay. All right. But we'll start with this kind of like very basic view of it. So it helps to understand how the color changes in terms of value, in terms of saturation, uh, just, in this, how the water thins out towards the top. So we'll look at this, and then of course we know that at any given time it just might not be this particular shape, and things will be different there. But it does help us to look at this, to understand it as a three-dimensional object. So what happens with translucent object, because it's not opaque, it's going to show change in value differently. It will be determined by how much light it's letting through. And obviously, if we are looking at the profile of a wave, we will see that, the foundation is the thickest part, and then when it gets thinner and thinner, that's where the light actually will be passing through more. And then also an interesting part here at the very top, if we are looking at the wave from the front, we will see that this part over here at the top gets a little bit darker before it gets this light aerated. So it's again because we see some thickness to it, even thicker than here at this more translucent part. So it's just things like this, kind of picturing it from different angles and trying to understand how that changes. And as far as value, it's, kind of very simplified view. And as far as colors go, we can just, start with the darker greens and get all the way up to the lighter values. It's not exactly for this particular wave, but it just shows the idea. And also as a three-dimensional object, it's usually when, we take a vase and we can put the light right on it, right from the right from the front, and we're going to get that really flat lighting, and it's just not going to tell us much about the object. But if we figure out the lighting kind of a little bit from the side, we're going to have some shadows that will describe the shape of the object. So when I'm taking the pictures at the ocean, I'm trying to get that angle as well. So it's not just, this whole front lit up and no shadows basically other than right within it, but something that shows you like the volume of the foam. And also this like these stretches of foam, how they basically curve going under the shadow that the wave itself casts within this tube. um, it also helps to understand like this idea that it's curving and how it's curving. So it's, all of this kind of helps And it is important also to, when we do, and it will be better, clearer seen in other examples, how when we have the foam in the sun and then it enters the shadow, we have to make that value darker. I see that mistake quite often. And then what it does, it kind of breaks that, the idea of reality, the illusion of reality, because it just doesn't work that way in real life. So let's go on to the next one. That's just a close up. I want to show this kind of moments closer, that why we have this lighter, also lighter area, because the water just drops, it becomes very mixed with air, aerated, and it becomes lighter. So at the same time, if it is in the shadow, it just, will get that kind of grayer, darker value, but it's still kind of, not the darkest, like comparing to the darker greens, let's say, in the water, or blues, it's still that lighter. It's, as values always, um, a darker, lighter, it's in comparison to something. We cannot just go saying light or dark. It's always in comparison. Um, Foam bouncing back, yeah, and it creates some really nice effects, and it depends again on the angle of the sun. Sometimes it's just more flat like this, more lit up, and then we just try to play the contrast, like maybe this darker value here and lighter foam here, and then still pick up a little bit of the darker area here. So it's three-dimensional. So it's not just taking the lightest, white pastel and just doing the foam. No, we still need to create that range of values to show the volume. So once that is done, there is, well, I already talked about translucency a little bit, and it's basically what it is just following this idea that at the thinnest part of the wave, the light is going to pass better, more light is going to pass through that area. And it's kind of, depends on the angle of the sun and the time of the day. For example, early, well, not early, but maybe like early afternoon, the sun is high in the sky, and you're not going to get the saturated colors so much as when it's in the late afternoon, and if the sun is more behind the waves, so there will be a kind of warmer saturated glow within it. And sometimes, yes, it's exaggerated when we paint it, but sometimes it just needs it. But just to be true, like I would not go with these colors, with this type of colors into this wave. So it still needs to correspond to the color scheme that, is kind of native to that scene, not taking something arbitrary. Let's see. Well, as I said, that was just kind of a classic setup that, the wave gets from thicker, thinner, then it breaks. But there are different variations when, for example, here, we cannot really say that the foundation of the wave is much darker than this part over here at the top. Here the reason is there's a lot of sand in that wave. It picks it up. It's not translucent anymore. The sun is basically hitting it pretty much um, from the angle, but also up front, from the front, kind of from the top right. And it's more kind of reflecting. It's not passing through it. So it's not as translucent in that situation to begin with, like here. And it's also not going to be depending on the thickness of the water because there's more opaque material within it. So again, just looking at every single situation is the best case scenario, but it does help to know, like some basic um, scenarios of how the water behaves. So we know this. Then again, let's take this one where the water is basically so pure that you don't even have that darker part at the foundation. This was from Saint Martin, and this Caribbean water, it's like so pure and turquoise. It was hard to actually see that darkening in these conditions. I have other pictures where, of course, yes, you see that, darker kind, it's different type of lighting, but sometimes you just don't see it there. And here, what's going on, it's very crazy situation here, like it's two waves merging into one each other. But about something like this, I would say one thing, if we paint something like this, people probably will be asking questions. So they will get stuck on this area more than, on the how beautifully you handled other things. So I would stay away from something peculiar and just stick to something a little bit more, easier to understand visually. So we don't, have people just thinking about technical stuff rather than enjoying what you did with pastels or oils. So um seascape palette, well, before I talk about color, I would like to just kind of review the properties of color because I already mentioned them, so might as well, just in case, go over just to refresh. I did refer to values, right? And values usually is how lighter or darker color is. That property is really the one that shows us that three-dimensional structure, and also shows us the notan kind of, we can see the pattern in the painting by the looking at the values, how they are arranged in the composition. So it is very important part, and it is really important to look at the values when you choose something to paint. um, just kind of looking at whether you have enough contrast in the scene. That is going to be uh, make it or break it for the painting. Not to say that sometimes you just have predominantly light values and you don't have a great painting out of it. Yes, you will, but it just takes certain skills, certain consideration for that. It just, you approach it differently. But something like this where you clearly have some dark values, some mid values, some lights, um, it's in a way easier to handle, to create kind of more engaging composition. So if you are starting with seascape painting, I would recommend going for something, with a more clearly defined shadows, with some mid values in there. So it's easier to kind of create that three-dimensional look. Temperature is something that I use a lot, and I think it's making the painting more alive. Definitely. Like sometimes I see seascapes beautifully done, but it's all in these like very cold colors. And what we need really, we need to see that the sunshine, the sunlight is actually warmer. The areas that are sunlit, they feel warmer. And even though like seascape is kind of tricky in this way, that we have a lot of blues, greens, and white. So where's warmth there? And it's up to us to create it kind of. It doesn't have to be warm, like, leaning to it doesn't have to be yellow, it doesn't have to be orange, but if you just have a little shift toward those colors in your whites in the sunlit areas, that already will create that energy, kind of visual energy in the painting, and will make it more interesting. And also it will make a difference in perception, whether it's a gray, uh, kind of overcast type of day, when the colors are more cold, or whether you have this warmth of the sunshine on the lit up areas, and coolness and the blues and the shadows. Like, you know, comparing these to these over here, we can definitely say that we have uh, stronger contrast in the shadow, right? Than here. No, we still have some sun happening here. So we do have a shadow. It's not completely, you know, soft, but we definitely see how this one is more energized. And it's because of the, you know, the contrast between this cooler, much cooler shadow and somewhat warmer highlights, even if they're, you know, those are white, but it's still, there's some warmth in it. And then we also have to look at chroma, and that's important to consider, because something that is translucent also, as water, it's going to have this chromatic color when the light is passing through it. It's most chromatic color we get when the light is passing through something. It's not even when it's reflected off something. So like if you look at the leaves on the tree, if you look at those that light is passing through, those will be the ones that are glowing. If we look at them, this wave and the light is passing through it from somewhere like behind, from the top, and still kind of like somewhat behind, the sun is behind the wave, we'll have that glowing light within. So it is important to choose the right chroma, because taking something like this here, like earth green, let's say, and using that for the lights, for the area where should be chromatic light green, is not going to express the idea of that bright sunshine passing through here. So that's why it's important to consider the chroma as well. And it's, you know, it's tied again to the colors on the overcast day versus colors that are kind of energized by the sunlight, and the sunlight brings purity in color, brings out purity in color. And um, depends on the time of day, like it can bleach out the color as well. If we're looking at midday and it's just, you know, sunny, very bright sunny day, it bleaches out the color, but kind of like more towards peripherals, you still will get more color. So here the colors I'm showing, it's not just, you know, that's it, that's the seascape palette. No, I just wanted to show you this. It's kind of three sets from the Blue Earth pastel sets, and you can see the whole how to say, the whole selection of their pastels on Dakota pastel site. And these are just, you know, can fit here basically, and that's why I'm showing. But it's, I like how they arrange them, because we can clearly see those saturated colors and then how they grade down the, you know, the corresponding colors when they're grayed down. Of course, as we know, when things are printed, they're not quite exact the same as the pastels we are looking at, so we correct for that. But I think it's still pretty good illustration for the idea, like, you know, blues here and how they, and greens, how they get more and more grayed down. So that's something that the terms that we are using often to describe the colors, and I will be painting today the demo. I will be referring, okay, I'm taking the more chromatic color for this area, or less chromatic, or darker, lighter, or warmer. So what else, what influences the color of the waves? Well, one of the most obvious things is the location, right? On Long Island, we have our waves kind of closer to this, like East Coast, but this one I took, this picture I took in Maine. Don't want to say that's their color, but these are the pictures I took in different places, and it's kind of more or less what I saw there, the colors. St. Martin, this beautiful turquoise color, and this is from Rhode Island. To me, it struck me as being like this teal, kind of teal color, interesting, dark. And I suppose on the West Coast, it's more towards blues. Not sure, not sure yet, but maybe like more towards here, these colors and blues. All right. This is just, something that's given. Whatever is in the water, whatever the bottom of the ocean is, the vegetation, that's going to contribute to it. But then there are some things, of course, that just going to contribute to what is reflected into water, how it's reflected, and that will bring a lot of color as well. So like people look at my work and say, oh, wow, there's a lot of color in this. And so where is this color coming from? Well, one of the obvious things is the sky reflecting into the ocean, right? Or any type of water. So how does this happen? Usually what we have is any area that's kind of smoother and more parallel to the sky is going to get the sky reflected. But when it starts, rising more at a more vertical angle, we start seeing more of that local color, whatever it is. So here it's this kind of olive green, kind of from darker to lighter. And again, depends on how thin it is, where, at what part of the wave it is. This one is the foundation. We see these little ripples, so it's darker, but here it's at the top, so it's thinner. And we see that the wave itself uh, is composed of like mini waves, mini ripples. So we have a lot of this happening. Like some of this, even on the slope, seems like this should be, it's rising, it should be greener, but we still have blue on this because it's just going to catch on this, kind of like more flatter areas, more parallel towards this. Oh, how to do this? Okay. So anyway, and it's not always the blue that's reflecting into the water. If it's overcast sky, we'll have gray. So if it's sunset sky, we'll have some golden colors, right? So that will happen. And what else here? I wanted to say, yeah. I think it was better seen about the, let me just go back to the very first. Because between the waves, as we have them, like the swell, then flatter area, then again the swell or the breaker, like this area is more flat, and it's going to be different on a different day, how much area in between, but that is more flat area, and it's going to catch more of that blue color from the sky or whatever the color is. So this is where it's going to be more blue or gray or any sky color. And then we see again that illustration that when the water rises, this is what we see. We see more of that local color. So let's go back. So what else? Also, we have to look for reflected light. That is going to be seen probably better in this next illustration here. Like this part here, let's say in the foam, because it's facing a very brightly lit area, it picks up this reflected light. And even though this is the shadow itself has a variety of values within it, and it can be a little bit warmer here because it reflects that warm light, but it's never going to be as uh, same value, same light value as what's reflecting it. So it's just another thing to consider when it comes to color. And what I do usually, I just take a lighter value, maybe a little warmer, or sometimes just, if overall area, if I'm using something like maybe like more ultramarine and purples, I can use for reflected light, maybe like something a little bit more turquoise, just making that differentiation for the reflected light, so it's a little different. So also what we see here, where the color is coming from, if we look at this wave, because it's translucent, there's light that's passing and illuminating the inside of the wave. And even though supposedly it's a shadow, but we can see the glow there. We can see how it's affecting it. And sometimes I would use this warmer purples or lavenders to show that. And I think it's just, is it there really? Is it pink inside? Probably not, but it does convey the idea of that, kind of warmer color in a way, glow. So yes, that's my artistic license. So I'm doing that. And another, let's see, angle of the sun. Well, I kind of, yeah, angle of the sun, that comes into play when late in the afternoon, we look at the ocean and compare it with what we see during the daylight. The colors are more saturated. We have a lot of turquoise from the sky. It not maybe like clear enough seen here, but it's still, it's there. Like there's more turquoise here. There are warmer colors here, and also there's some, purple to the shadows as well. So it's just, looking closer. And one thing, don't base 100% your color palette for the seascape or anything on photographs, because it's just, not going to be alive enough. We just have to, sometimes we have to add something to make it sing, or just remember, rely on your memory. And if the color doesn't look energetic enough, but that's what I'm trying to express, I will be looking for some sort of contrasting color. It's something that would make it visually more exciting, more interesting. So, well, this is just that other example of different time of the day, how that changes, how the color palette can be completely different from what's during the day. And let's see here, the foam, it does present a challenge. Often I see it in people's work. And the problem with the foam, it's so tempting to just take white and do it all over. But we need to see all the subtleties within it. And what's going to be is again the area of the directly lit uh, foam should be contrasting with the area that's in the shadow, and that should that contrast should be indicated strongly enough. Otherwise, like if we are painting sunny day, but this is not clear enough, this contrast is not strong enough, it's too vague, uh, now we are thinking about a gray day basically, because this is when the shadows are a lot softer, we don't get that contrast. So it's something to watch for. And then just the kind of contrast between cool and warm within the shadow is also something that will help to show, to keep it more interesting visually, and to show how it's flows basically, uh, how the shape is. Like for example, if it's more outside, like getting more outside, like there's more blue coming into it. If the foam is or in the area that's thinner, the wall is getting thinner, then this being translucent, that will make that foam also more translucent. So it will be lighter and it will be a somewhat greener, uh, anything, well, maybe turquoise, not necessarily green, but it's just, it's going to be changing with the wave. And also, just like I said previously, just shaping it as you would something else that's three-dimensional, with the highlights, with the deeper shadows, mid values, mid tones. So also, the foam itself is not as reflective as water, but it still picks up that color from the sky on the flat surface. So what's going to happen a lot, that like the foam blanket, you see how it's more blue and it's a slightly darker value than here, what's getting the highlights. So it's interestingly, we'll have these vertical parts of foam very often are brighter than the horizontal ones. So something to watch for too. And of course, when we have something like this, a stormy day, foam can be not just not white, but actually it's like a sand whipped up in it. It was really, wild ocean day. And not that I would paint maybe like this. Again, it's asking for trouble. People will be like, what is it? But it's just something to keep in mind, because there is some, tint, yellowish tint, even to the foam there in a distance from that. And we can bring it all, maybe like not necessarily like this, unless I really want to show like all this sand churned up. But, and also when we paint the foam, we have to consider that the sun is passing through it in some of the areas. So even like some shadow areas, like here, they're still warmer, because yes, they're thicker, but there's still more sun passing through that than in the areas somewhere here at the bottom of the wave, where there's less sun coming from anywhere. So it's cooler shadows versus maybe like, um, dark mid-tones, but warmer. So there's always this kind of warm, cold contrast that I'm looking for. And after this, well, this is what I'm going to paint today. I send you also the picture of this, and with a grayscale uh, value study that I did. And I usually do those, not necessarily that I would do it and then do the grid and transfer it. No, it just helps me to kind of familiarize myself with what I'm going to do in color, what to pay attention to. Sometimes like, okay, maybe I should, like here, if you squint right now and look at this paint, at this reference here, you will see that this is kind of blending a lot with the background. So this is something for you as an artist to think, okay, do I want this wave stand out more? Maybe I want to make the background lighter so this pops darker, or do I make the wave darker behind it so this comes forward as a little bit lighter? You know, all those things we can manipulate and get the effect we want. And here, there's translucency, certainly, that I will be trying to get. And also there's the effect where the shadow divides this foam stretched, curved alongside the wave. So I will be watching that I have this clear enough, this border between the lights and shadows. And pretty much, okay, yeah, another slide. I just want to show you close up of what's happening here. These are the hard pastels in my, well, this is a different painting. It's just something I had a good picture of a close up to show you what's kind of like, you know, when you look close. It was a larger painting as well. And it shows you the texture. Basically what I have here, just a layer or two of these hard pastels, like new pastels, crater color. And that's about it. I'm going with those, maybe like a layer or two usually, and then I switch to softer pastels. What it does to me, I kind of set up, you know, the indication of the areas that are going to be lighter, darker. Here I'm already working with not just values, but the, you know, color that I want to see there. So, and I'm working soft edges here, because yes, later I will make this edge sharper, but initially I just kind of create the vague blueprint with the hard pastels, what's going to be, what it's going to look like. I even indicated a little bit of that more translucent area where it's going to be thinned out. So why hard pastels in this stage? Why not jump right away with the soft pastels? You can see how you can keep it like very thin and achieve that, you know, kind of mapping out the color. With a soft pastel, it's, you know, it's so soft that a lot of that pigment is grabbed by the surface of the paper. And if I change my mind as I go or want to layer something different, it's just like more pigment accumulated. It's, you know, it's going to prevent me from doing it. And also it's easier to brush it off in this situation if I wanted to brush it off, but I usually don't use the brush up until later if I really need to correct something. I usually prefer, you know, to let the colors kind of accumulate. And if I'm not happy with some spot, I just will layer the color on top of it, and just, you know, how they show through each other, it just creates that special interest. All right, so I will have this as a PDF for you separately because it's going to be better picture than the Zoom recording. So that will be later also in that folder that I gave you previously. All right, so stop sharing this, and I'm going to set up a different camera now. And okay, everyone is hearing everything so far, right? Yeah, okay, always good. So I'm going to switch to a different camera and a different microphone. So let's see, Logitech. All right, and I have this pink cast for some reason. I don't understand why. Let's try differently. I had it set up And now, okay, just took that. All right. So one thing about Zoom, you probably will see it better than it was, it will be recorded, but the very dark values get compressed more. So I'm going to do it with the iPhone, record with the iPhone. That's going to be better color, I hope. So usually is. So we'll work with that. But I also might be adjusting it as I go. Sometimes as I start adding the color on paper, it starts kind of refocusing, what they call it, white point balance or something like this. So I might have to readjust it. So this is not the wave. This is the wave from a different time. But I just wanted to judge, calibrate the colors basically for the Zoom. And this is what I'm doing today. Okay. If anyone has any questions right now, let me know. Okay, I already sketched out this a little bit, and let me just set this first. So during the demos on Zoom, it's very different from doing them at live workshops because I have these cameras in front of me basically, and it's kind of dancing around this. So. Okay, I switched the microphone for the webcam, so you should hear me better now, as well as I will be speaking. All right, so right now is 11:47. Let's see if I can make it faster. This my setup, basically I change a little bit. The picture that you have has a lot more foreground here. I don't need that. I want to focus on this area. And what I, oops, why does it do this? All right, my iPad every now and then is trying to switch to, you know, I don't want to pronounce the name Siri, but sometimes some words sound like that and it brings the view. Okay, so the very dark area is at the bottom here. And what I'm doing for the seascapes, I usually just disregard the foam altogether as much as I can. And if it's not just, you know, a chunk of it, maybe then something like, you know, stretched areas on the face of the wave, I'm not going to paint them differently unless it's like really big painting and like big areas of it. Then maybe I'll do something different. But so far, I'm just trying to get the green for the whole area, and then we'll layer that foam on the already when the painting is dry. I will do that later. So let's make sure this is tucked in. So I start with the darker, and I have to be careful. This one is actually, I think, is either Ceylon. I don't know if it's Ceylon blue or green or spruce blue. And I apologize, but it's kind of hard to keep track of these colors because they are not marked anymore. So, but I have to be careful not to get too dark because I don't want to kill the light in my wave. And that can happen if I just take these colors, this and olive green. These are like two colors that I like to use. One is cooler, one is warmer. And I don't know if you can see this. No, it doesn't really show, but it will be showing when we actually wash it down. And here, there's actually, because big part of the wave here, it's already doesn't have the shadow on it. So it's dark, but it's also like olive green, dark olive green. So it's cooler inside, but it's warmer on the outside, even though it's still dark. And we have kind of fringe of the foam here happening, which I'm still going to use a little bit of this dark green for the area. So when I layer that light color over that, it's going to be dark showing through that blue or purple, whatever I'm using. And then as it goes up, rising up, I will be switching to the warmer greens. And if I have to make this lighter or darker later, that's fine. I can adjust that. It's not, Okay, you know what? I forgot here. Start recording. I set up the phone and I always forget to press go. So from now on, this is recording of the iPhone. All right, so this is the part, and I still need to get that kind of greener, slightly darker color at the top here. It is tempting to start being, cutesy like this, but the whole modeling of the wave, it's going to be a bit late. I really just need to indicate the areas of that green. There is a lot of green in this wave, definitely. And what's above is kind of this warmer and a little grayer at the same time at the bottom. Actually, maybe even cooler. So somewhere here, I will use that cooler green color. And here it gets a little lighter Again, lights I could bring later, easy, just with dry pastels. I don't need to have a wash for that, but that's okay. And this one is really, this piece of foam, it's like very small, and still I'm going to use a little bit of that darker color at the foundation for that, to show that it's not just sitting flat. And instead of very light color, I'm still going to give it a little bit of the kind of blue or turquoise color, and then have the highlights on top of that. So I'm doing this because it's like a separate chunk on itself. Here we have a lot of green showing through that foam, so that's why I'm having this area green, and I will get it back later. Okay, now from here I have to do the back of the, and I'm going to get the blues in. And instead of just, you know, making it all one kind of very blended area, I like to have a little bit of texture happening there. Not too much though, because in a distance particularly, we don't want to create that same activity, I guess, to call it. And in the distance, a little bit more grayed down, maybe. We'll start with that, and then I will just add a little bit of a and then I'll just add some blue. I had one person asking me sometime, but isn't it that, you know, the water behind the wave is always on the horizon is always dark? Absolutely not. It can be anything. It can be very light. Really depends. So don't let the stereotypes sway you. And then the foreground here, the foam blanket. So this is lighter, you know, by that idea that the horizontal surface gets more light from the sky, from the sun. So actually the green, or, you know, the color of the shore is going to show through that, but it's going to be lighter and I guess a little bit more grayer, warmer. So I'm going to use this. It's kind of light greenish gray, this color. And it also, when I wash it down, it will separate this area from this darker area, and these blues separate from here. So you will see, if you haven't done in the painting yet, you will see how you wash it, and it's like everything is gone, even if there was something more clearly stated, but then you have to get it back again. And that's okay, that's not a big deal. But that's why also I don't really spend much time polishing, you know, the details or anything, because with this technique, it's not going to be staying through this wash process. And as far as some of these kind of darker areas, yeah, maybe. And this is kind of gray, so maybe this, and it is darker. So I am going to use a little bit of this, a little pressure, but still kind of this grayer color. So not much in terms of kind of setting it up with exact color, but just giving it a base. Sometimes it's kind of like working on a toned paper, but I tone it in specific areas for creating the drawing later. So that's it as far as the underpainting, and let's see, it still looks okay on the screen and on the phone. And now I'm just going to wash it, and for that I'm using, well, this is kind of already worn out a little bit, the brush, but I used to get them at Michael's. And I am also using this. And I got a word from my student that you can get it in Walmart again. So I actually ordered some because it disappeared for a while for the reasons that we know. So this is 70% isopropyl alcohol. I used to use 90%. The difference is this one just gives you a little bit more time to push the pigment around before it just sets into the paper. But you can also use water, but for the demo purpose, it's definitely better to use alcohol because it dries faster. And that means the paper has less chance to buckle. So I also have a jar with water because brush picks up a lot of this pigment, and I clean the brush, wipe it with a paper towel so it's not all drippy with water before I put it into back to the jar with alcohol. And it is kind of a balance between the not having too much liquid on your brush and not to have it too dry. So if there's too much, then it runs, and too much liquid might just take your pigment off the paper, dripping it down. Some people love the effects, dripping effects. I just don't like that it takes a lot of pigment where I actually want to have the darker values. Sometimes it would be gone if I go for those effects, but it's still something that's, personal preference, so some people go. And I also kind of use my brush marks in a way to either describe the shape of the wave or kind of making some interesting marks as I go.
Lina,
Uh-huh.
quick question. It will work only with hard pastel or it's work with soft too?
You can do soft, I'm sure. Just try not to put much pressure. Go very lightly. It's just, soft pastel deposits a lot more pigment, so it might get gooey kind of. So work very light, and I think you would be fine. And if you have Rembrandt, that's probably perfect for that.
I
don't know
have Rembrandt, but it's still soft pastel. I don't have hard pastel at all.
Well, it's okay. Try Rembrandt. The harder pastel is probably better for this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just because, like I said, it's less pigment into the paper. So if I want to lighten this just for the see how the wet paper starts buckling a little bit. So that's something I don't want, but usually it's dries and it straightens more or less. So it's just something I have to work with. But for me particularly, because I like working on the side of the stick, having bumps in the paper is not ideal, because then you just don't get that nice kind of flat mark if you want to touch all the surface. And see how this kind of blends in. So this is where I will have to just come in with my pastels later, dry pastels, and create that difference in the values and the colors. All right, let's do this faster because it's not that precious stage, because it's all covered up anyway. And sometimes you do get some interesting marks that you kind of end up keeping, even showing through, but usually a lot of it just gets covered up. And also, some pigments dilute better than the others. Some pigments more like stain. So if you did watercolors or even in oils, you probably know that probably watercolor is still a better analogy. Like I think that phthalo colors is more like stain. And if you take ultramarine, that is, you know, like more of the pigment particles. So those are more likely to be washed off the paper rather than sink into it and get you that nice color. So when you actually work for a while in this technique, you might realize that you prefer some of those colors just because of that. So this is pretty light, and I don't mind it being light. I actually wanted it to be that way. Oh. All right, let's get through this faster. So by the way, I already mentioned it there in the notes. I think that it's 400 yard paper, 12 by 18 inches. I use this size a lot, even though it's not that standard frame size, which does help if you end up framing things. But it's kind of working for the seascape for me for some reason, because I don't have it, you know, like very elongated. Like if you work in a ratio 1:2, then you have just like a long wave to deal with. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's just too much, but this one is kind of gives you enough room to for your, you know, center of interest and a little bit of the movement in the wave, but you don't get that very horizontal stretch of it. Let's see how this one is so brilliantly blue. I think it's even more than I wanted, but okay. I used to make this area very dark in the distance. And then I started being a little bit more cautious because it just dark colors sometimes just makes it so, I don't want to say depressing, but it just takes the life out of it. You know what else I want to do? Add a little bit of green here. And let's do it with, where's the dog? Let's try this one. Yeah, that's it. I could do it with dry pastels, but since I'm just working on this right now, because this turned out to be really light blue, I feel like I want some of this to be darker and the area where my highlights are going to be against it. So it's something I always want to plan. And actually I do like what I did here. So let's do a little bit more of that. Usually I don't go back and forth. I just come in later with a dry pastel and fix it, but just want to show you that it's possible. Then I also had a book by some watercolor artist, and she does use pastels sometimes with her watercolors. And she was saying, well, you have to do it while the watercolor is still wet. So basically what I did. So she's using pastel that way, but then I had another watercolor artist's book, and he says you have to let it dry and then do that. So it just shows you how all of us are just different in our techniques and what we prefer. So this is drying now, and so far so good. Checking my monitors so my color is not getting too dark. All right, I'm going to take this away. So now it's that pause in the process when this is still drying. And someone in another class said, why don't you use the hair dryer for that? And well, this is pastels, so hair dryer would just set all my pastel that's accumulated in, under the board here in the catcher, would set it off in the air. So I don't want to do that, but it does dry pretty soon, so pretty fast. And the way I attach it is, I don't mind just doing these corners a little bit. Some artists just do this kind of hinges, so you have the whole surface. But even if you frame a painting, you're still losing that corner under the frame, so I don't see it being a big deal. So it works for me. All right, gets a little bit less puffy. That's good. And All right, I think this part is actually pretty dry, so I can start now shaping up the wave. That's what I usually start with in this. And I see that, by the way, here it looks a little bit more saturated blue than it is. Just wanted to mention that it's a little less saturated in real painting. So I'm going to start with the same basically color that I used for the underpainting, and I'm very, very lightly touching it. So think about that detail that I showed you, that the background still should be showing through that. And that's why the hot pastel or Rembrandts, like those harder pastels, are easier to handle at this point, because you just touch it lightly and it deposits very, very transparent, basically, layer of color, not too much. And I would not do this, because then I just lose my underpainting, and it's just by layering colors it will get to that smoother effect eventually. And if I have to, later, just kind of make some areas a little smoother, I can always do that. But with sanded paper, I just let it to accumulate a little bit of pigment first. And another point, some people might actually kind of indicate where this foam stretches, how they want this foam stretches to go. I usually just go with the darker, but if it does help you, you can just kind of do a little bit of a, but don't grab the very white pastel. I just take a kind of like purplish gray for this, so it's still not jumping out. I don't want to create anything that I will have to fight later if I need to cover it with darker color or overlap it somehow. So I don't want to do anything like that. So something like this. But usually what I do, and like I said, if it helps you, you can do that. You can even do kind of this way, so that shows you the shape. But I just go usually, kind of getting these darker areas around it. And then what's lighter stays light. At the bottom, this is where we have the thickest wave, this thickest wall of water. And that's why it's important in that area to get that darker color. And like I said before, that it's kind of from lighter greens to darker greens to maybe slightly cooler greens, but it's not that same intensity dark as in the shadow. So also something I'm doing constantly, particularly with soft pastels, when I pick up a stick, let's say do something, I put it down, then I have the the little paper towel wet, kind of damp, clipped next to my easel. And then after that, I wipe my glove with that, and then I wipe it again and dry. And it's a habit, and that just keeps my pastels clean, and I don't transfer like those, colors that I pick up from previous layers. They don't get transferred to another color. So it's just a habit. If you can do it, that's helping. So I'm getting this lighter and wearing different greens too. So it's not just one particular. But this is the kind of a stage to keep in mind that I'm not going to get a lot of the hard pastels here. And maybe this slightly lighter color. But I don't want to commit to any kind of highlights yet. That's too defined. I just want to create that gradient that kind of rises from the darker to lighter. And that's it for there. And then it's kind of in a way no, but we'll cover it up.
Excuse me, Lana, do you always work? Do you always work from dark to light?
Yeah, always that way. It does. Yeah, well, it's kind of similar to the oils, right? You probably work from the.
Yeah, that's how I usually do. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's easier. I had people who do watercolors take the class, or the weekly class, and she had such hard time. Just mentality is different when you work different way from lights to dark. But with pastels, it's definitely helping because we, if we start with lighter color, then it's harder to bring those darks, keeping them nice, clean, darker colors. It's just not working out because the white interferes. The white in the layer underneath is going to mess it up. So that's why for pastels, you know how there's like rules meant to be broken, but here it's just like one of those rules that kind of saves you some pain. But there are some artists who go back and forth, and I've done it sometimes. Like if you make a mistake in values and then you want to rework it, and what do you do? What choices? Well, you do that. And now I can indicate some of the dark foam within the shadow part. So the top. So I'm not doing any of that very light foam yet. I'm just setting up those darker colors for them. And actually, let's do it. It's kind of very yellow, but I think it will be good for this area, and maybe like cover this up. And then a little bit of this. And for the top, I think I have a better color in soft pastels. Sometimes it's just also a matter of, you know, the color that you want, so you switch sooner. And let's bring it here. Everywhere where the water is already, you know, kind of curving at the top, like having a bit of that color show, it kind of will unify that look. So cooler, lighter, then it's still not connected very well, but it's kind of blocking for that. So I will develop it a little bit later. And let's see, maybe just a little indication of the where the foam kind of starts. And this is the, I don't know if it's kind of turquoise, but it's very green turquoise that I picked up for this. I'm kind of sticking to these green colors here and not the brightest lights. In the beginning, it's just about kind of setting up the overall shape, just so that I see what's in the shadow, what's above, where the darker colors, so that helps. And now I can spend some time either in the foreground or in the background. Let's get the foreground, I guess, first. Background is kind of the value I want, and this is less of what it should be. So getting that closer to the final value is probably more important, so that we start reading the whole work better, the way it should be. So for the foreground, like I mentioned previously, I'm using those a bit more muted colors now. Actually, yeah, this would do it. And I can start creating the lighter areas. Let's bring a little bit of this. A very light touch. And it's very hard to get to this side. Okay. So here, again, we have to think about perspective, even though it's pretty shallow here, like it's in front of us, but we cannot make these openings in the foam too round. They basically go like, you know, like this. Let me get a darker gray. Okay, yeah, you see this. So this way, you know, this makes the foam more flat. And it's also the opportunity to create some sort of movement in the painting. So it's not just, you know, this rectangle. We can lead with the openings in the foam. So if I make them a little bit more pronounced, maybe in this area, and then kind of thinner and disappearing, smaller. So it does lead the eye. So this is what composition is about. And I also like to bring the color from one area to the other. Sometimes it's something I see that's echoed. Okay, now that I have this darker leading point, now I actually can see how I can use this to build the lighter colors around it. So that is dark, maybe something a little bit more green. Let's see, what about this one? So I would have a mix of grays, but I already have grays in a way in the foam, like this slightly cooler grays. Some greens. Before I do anything that's really, colors we associate with the foam, I make sure I have enough of this kind of intermediate mid-tone color that will give me the shadows. And speaking of shadows, I can bring some of the blues into it as well, though this is kind of purple, very light purple. So there is an interesting kind of element here that's thicker water. So maybe I'll have it somewhere, as originally I kind of planned for that right here. Oh, too light. Where's my darker? Yeah, it should be darker. And then there's also a little bit, but they are grayer, kind of ripples going right here. Again, it's good to have just a base for them and maybe a little bit lighter green, not the dark one, because this is thinner, more shallow. And then later I'll just have the color that reflecting more of the maybe like sky color and the surface of the sand showing through, but this is to prepare for that. Also, something that we need quite often, like when we have the edge, like this foam and the shore, the sand, we need to bring a little bit of that edge into it. Sometimes it can be just a warmer, slightly darker. Showing a bit of the sand here, or because we still have the water here, maybe it makes sense to have that darker green instead. A little bit. But what's important, not to continue it all kind of throughout the painting, but just show it in some spaces and in some place, and then just let it disappear, kind of lost and found. And it will do better than it wouldn't divide the area so much. Okay, so this is in place. Maybe let's bring a little bit of blue into that. Kind of the areas where the water opens in between the foam. It reflects more blue into it. So just getting a little bit of that, kind of a hint of it helps. And now I can take maybe something like lighter blue, or even lighter than that. So I tried that, it looks a little too dark. Maybe I'll go lighter, but I go carefully. I go lighter carefully. I don't want to go too light in the beginning, and then it's just, you don't have anywhere to go. I just keep comparing it usually with, you know, how the singers sing. They cannot start, I guess, with a very high note, because then they don't have the range to work with. So it's kind of the same way with pastels. For me to later show the highlights on that foam, if I start with the lightest lights, the highlights are not going to stand out that much. So that's why I build up this more carefully. But it does help also kind of to have the highlight maybe somewhere, just to know what that lightest light is going to be. And let's say I have a spot that I kind of feel good about, where that's going to be really light. Let's do something different for this, a little warmer. And I can put that very light color like this. So this shows me now how light my lightest light is going to be as the highlight. So this seemed like it was the lightest before, but now it isn't. So having that relationship defined in your painting, kind of established, it helps to know what you're using and whether it's safe enough. So here I can make it smoother instead of building up a lot of texture, to kind of let it go smoother on its own. I can help it if I feel that's better. And then just kind of connect these areas. And now I have to remember, this is already that kind of the front row of foam that's actually a little bit lighter, a little bit more warmer, I would say, in colors. So I'm going to use maybe a slightly different warm. This is a kind of very light, warmer green. So I can get the highlights, which actually somewhere right here as well. So all of this, of course, should take a little bit more time to kind of look at it more carefully, to see where it's needed, where you can kind of just suggest it. And And here. So this same color I can start bringing here as well. And let me try to get to this. Okay, that's really butchered. All right, for now it's like this. Later I'll correct it when I can get to it. And again, very light right now because I just want to get kind of, yes, I do want the color to be closer to what, you know, eventually should be there, but it's also that value, establishing their value relationship. That's what I'm looking for. And perfecting how it all clicks together, I will be doing later. And let's see here. I do want to bring this also in there. So let's see if I just can get away with this blue. Or maybe again the kind of like light blue here. So here I just want to be a little bit more finished before I get to play with the foam, with the lighter foam. And I also want the background to be in place. So foam is something that sits on top, really. So it's kind of that same way approaching it in painting. So I want to get everything laid out, all the colors in there before I actually start, you know, kind of getting all that in. Let's see, where's my blues that I was using? So it would be this and this. Let's try. So I can bring a little bit more that texture at the top with the thinner lines. And let's see this green, the darker green that I was doing. So this really like very dark teal color. That's what I'm using here. I'm trying to kind of shape up this swell, I guess, to call it, behind it. So that will make this stand out more. And then maybe a little bit of that same kind of idea, so it doesn't just stop sharply after this, then we get it all smooth, because you know it doesn't really happen like this. There should be still a little bit of texture in a distance. Okay, and now I can bring some of the soft pastels in this as well. So let's see if I can add some of the blues. Those hard pastels, particularly if you work larger, they're really saving you some money as well. And it's quality pigment, it's just that there's more binder in that. I'm kind of taking it a little bit more towards greener blues. The reference, I think, shows the ultramarine blues. I took it more towards turquoise, but I think I like it that way. But we'll add also more of the other colors. I don't know, I don't just try to kind of get this every wave or something. I just kind of go for the combination of colors that kind of suggest the waves, but also just have that nice vibration about them, that they go together well, that they, you know, indicate how it picks up the color from the sky, maybe. And if we look at the waves in a distance, particularly, those swells, they have the darker part, then they have this, well, let's do it on this here, because I kind of want it darker to be in there. So let's show it here. So there's this darker, more vertical part, and then there's a little bit almost purple color before they get into that lighter blue area where, I don't know if it's too light, but let's try. Yeah, it's too light. Let me get different blue. Okay, this should be good. So then we get that area of trough that it's called, in between the waves and between the swells. So that purplish color is kind of transitional color. So you don't jump from the lighter blue, which is, by the way, is not really light, not really very light, but again, in relationship to that, it is lighter. And it just lets that purplish color, just let it transition. So I like building transitions between colors, not just jump from lighter to darker. There are some areas where it's needed, of course. I don't want to just generalize completely, but a lot of times just having a bit of a intermediate color to bind the others just works nicer than having a contrast, stark contrast between them. Okay, I'm just going to leave this here like this because I cannot get my hand at the angle that I want. And also in the distance now, like the color I have is pretty saturated, but towards the distance, I would want to kind of start graying it out and maybe make it even a little lighter. Sometimes it's darker, just gray, sometimes it's lighter, but it does help visually to kind of quiet it down in the distance. So whatever works. And I think this gray works with that. So we have more contrast closer to us. And even here, eventually, maybe I will want to downplay some of this and kind of focus more on what's within the wave. And this color, by the way, is very nice to start bringing some of these grays in here as well. But it should be lighter. That one should be lighter, and maybe some of this purple will work. So that's a warmer color. It's kind of warm purple. Just kind of color here in between. Oops. But as a kind of like the first base color, well, after the underpainting, and then maybe some light gray or blue, light blue. So eventually it just will get mixed with other colors that are maybe more local, but it will have a hint of that initial purple. So I like effects like that, kind of creating those. All right, I think this is, let's separate this because right now it just kind of goes a little too monotonous. So okay, shouldn't be making it too busy behind this because that's where the interest is. But I didn't want this dark shape continue all the way throughout, so I'll just later, maybe I will adjust it, or I'll take this darker color and kind of create a bit more of the separate wavelets. All right, let's see. So far it's recording. It looks okay. All right, now it's time to actually work on the wave a little bit more detailed. And now I can see how much deeper I should make these shadows. So if I don't show it deep enough, then it doesn't create the feeling of the illusion that it's thick enough in that area. So that's why it's important to check how we perceive it. So my darker colors are here. So I like using this bottle green to some extent, but not just all over, because it's still very dark and kind of very yellowish, kind of brown, makes it look very brown. So I just want to lay that darker foundation, but then I'll come back with a different color. It's a bit more chroma, and maybe this one. Actually, I think this one. It's very, I don't know what brand this is. It's very dense, and maybe I had it for a while, so I don't know what happened, but and it's warmer, but it's very dark as well, and it's good for these areas. So it kind of helps to go over that brown color. I guess I could have used it from the beginning there as well, but I do like to have different kind of hints of different colors, and then kind of push them towards the way where I want it to go. So this one is again a cooler green, so maybe like here it's better, and somewhere here. And then also maybe somewhere in this area, but it's a little too chromatic for this. It needs to be grayer. So maybe taking kind of like cooler, grayer turquoise, kind of going over this area will help. And the way I see the foam here, it kind of has this gray purple sort of hint of that. So I want to try this, which is just that purplish gray color. And I can start already kind of thinking of this, creating this kind of fringe, this broken foam. So it's not just flat marks. because I do want to keep some of that darker color. And as far as darker color goes, there are areas where it's darker, and then as it comes out of the shadow, it becomes lighter again. So get that. And for the top, let's get this a little bit smoother. So the texture behind the wave, it doesn't help it to read smoother. So I raised it just a little bit so it's taller. And let's get somewhat darker. Green right here. Oops, too dark, but we can make it lighter. Let's get this again and do that. I think it's the same. All right, so this slightly lighter area, but it should be really cooler green. A little bit cooler. So this is that kind of delicate fold edge here. So I can start working on some of them foam inside. Kind of suggesting this. And I also need to kind of decide for myself where is that area, where's the border between the light and the shadow, so I don't, you know, kind of make unreal that it's a lot lighter here and then it drops too far down. Let's see, maybe I'll start with this and kind of make this the edge, maybe warmer color would be better. But still keeping some of that gray showing from underneath. And then there will be more of that gray. But at this point, you see how if I use the hard pastel, it just becomes, the line becomes really, well, not the line, but the mark becomes very smooth. And I don't really want that. I want that more textured, kind of looser look. So that's definitely the time to use softer pastels for that. And there's also more colors in soft pastels. So at this point, just definitely a winner. And I think I got too much going on here and it should be connected. And let's do that. Oops, too light. Oops, something scratchy there. So this will be the border and maybe like over here. So to show that the foam recedes into shadows. And I also want to show how it's not going straight, but kind of curves with the wave. So it is darker here at the base. And then as it rises, it's going to become lighter because of the translucency of the wave. So let's also get that lighter green color into it first, because like I mentioned before, I want the foam to sit on top, not then taking green and going into it, because I will lose the effect of it being, you know, so kind of loose. Does it happen that I go back? Yeah, all the time. But the idea is to actually not to, because then it looks kind of like you meant every mark you put, you meant it. If you start fussing with it, then you start fiddling, and very often it shows. And that's not really what we want, right? We want people to think that everything we do is just, you know, was done in one big swish. It's a little too yellow there. Okay, so I need to start kind of getting even lighter than that. With some of their really light streaks showing. Not so much here. What happens with the wave, it's, you know, when it starts leveling off, it starts becoming thicker again. So we won't get that same translucency in the areas that are lower. So, it, you know, something to keep in mind. But when it actually rising taller and folding, this is when we have that fuller effect. It's just a matter of kind of blending some of it, but not really blending. I wouldn't do that here, but hard pastels are pretty much also your blending tool very often. So you just can kind of go over soft pastel build up and it will make it smoother. So if I want to get a little bit more of this kind of smoother color, this is what hard pastel will do perfectly. And it will give a little bit of that color to it as well. So here, just like I was showing in that slide presentation, parts of this here, parts of the wave are going to start picking up that blue from the sky. So we can really indicate like this kind of different edges that the wave creates, like splitting the surface. You can show that, but I would need more time to actually go more specific about it, but that's the idea. Even here, like on the water, on the part of the water, this blue, and even here on this little wavelet, you can see also on the reference how this blue is reflected onto the parts that are kind of like slanted. Even more intense blue could do. That's just to illustrate it. Okay, this is a little too bright because this is where it should be. This way it should start kind of leveling off, and I need a different green, slightly darker, but no, this is still dark. Let's try this. Little too yellow, so that's why it's difficult to pick the colors ahead of time, and I usually don't. But with the internet, I try to show you at least like the base colors. So that's why I say initial selection, because I end up during the demo, I am going to, I know that I would be going to the box and trying to find a better corresponding color. Okay, at this point, I think it's safe to get to this. Maybe just a little bit more. Kind of make this a little cooler. This wave also is a little bit different because it's not as light, not as kind of aerated there, but I think I still want to make it that way. At least pick out some of the because we need some interest, and it does have those kind of separation of the little light. So when I have details like this, it kind of stretch of the space, and if I just left it, just a big chunk of it, and it does nothing, it just sits there, kind of no interest, it's, you know, not good for the painting. It should contribute more. it should be interesting. Like every part should have some sort of interest in it. And we can bring it with contrast. We can bring it with some, you know, kind of like smaller, finer detail, or just temperature contrast sometimes works well. So something that will make it more special, kind of not just so it's also darker here behind this lighter foam, so it's a good time to take care of this. And it has some of this darker. And maybe some of the dark color, darker gray. It's actually purplish gray. That's what this color is. And it works well for the shadows here. It's not loud, it's very low chroma. So it kind of gives me a chance to create a foam, indication of a foam, but it kind of blends with it as well. So it doesn't stand out, not a loud one, so it's good. And it's not just kind of more boring gray, it has this nice bluish kind of purple color, so definitely is a nice color to have at your disposal. By the way, it's Terry Ludwig, but I would not know the name. All right, so let's get this part more defined, and it should be something like light green. Also maybe some kind of duller green areas within here, but next to this purplish color they look warmer. So same value, but it does create more interest when it's breaking it up. All right, let's see if this works. I think it should be more towards greens, not blues on there. So just looking for some greener gray, and I think something like this will work. So let's create some of this lighter texture happening here. And this is when it really will start being more exciting, because before it's just kind of, you know, baking the cake, the foundations, just now we can get all those fringes. And so here there's already kind of, it starts coming out of the shadow, and we'll have some of the foam actually picking up the sun. So for this, Okay, so it's a little bit kind of warmer, brighter at this point. It catches more light. And then there's like very interesting kind of parts to this one. And as far as getting it all like exactly what it's, you know, what's here, that's not going to happen. And I find that if I try very hard to shape it exactly, it's just starts being a little stiff. It's best to kind of let your hand kind of show some natural, you know, energy, some marks that you make, and leave them alone if they look okay, because kind of trying to tidy them up too much, it just then kind of ruins the effect of that freely kind of falling water. And always remember that it's the movement, it's moving objects, so any single moment, it's just so different. So this is another color I had in my hand, and I think it's kind of okay, but now this part is really lighter. And I guess it is, but let's add a little bit of that to the other area. And there will be kind of a highlight here as well, but minor highlights for later. Right now, okay, this is darker, this is lighter as I wanted it to be. Also, what's happening, this blue, that's kind of reflection of that blue sky right at the smooth top. But before I put that on, I want to add slightly darker green on top of it back again, because I think it got a little bit lighter. So that would be another area that I want to kind of do and leave alone, because if I start going back and forth too much, I will ruin the effect. All right, let's put that blue on, and it should stand out against that background. Let's see if this does. Yeah, it does. And it is subtle. Kind of hard to get to this. But that's the idea. And what also happens, we can actually run a little bit from the top, kind of to smoothen it a little bit, if that's the word, make it smoother. Kind of like this. And if I want to take it even further, I'll make it even a bit lighter to get to it. Let's try this one. Okay. Oops. Just Okay, that's the effect I was going for. Kinda getting that light blue at the top and then a little bit sleek and smooth towards the bottom. And I don't think it's happening here as much. I did a little bit, but this is the kind of like the water edge that's very sleek, and it does pick up that blue color. Okay, so let's just try to do this part faster. We have 124, so I'll try to wrap it up sooner. And I also want to show you that brush spray technique will do a little bit here and here. So usually I like to do it later when the painting is kind of finalized, but I don't want to show it too. No, it's too yellow now for this. We need something. Let's try like this. So actually blue, light blue probably is still the best for maybe even something like this, because our translucent water still shows that blue background through it, and then only some areas of it are going to catch that really bright light. So I'll do this and maybe kind of give it a head start on the spray over here. Kind of getting a little too parallel, kind of this and that, so. So this here, more pronounced curl, and then here where it's coming out of shadow, it's also a little bit lighter. So just kind of trying to shape it up this way. And of course we have some of this happening in the background. Again, right now looks very light, but the foam is light in a way, right? And right now I still don't have my brightest light colors. So that will be eventually helping. Just the top of the area that's in the shadow. And also the foam. Should be bigger. Let's bring a little bit of that texture so it's not sitting as a flat gray area. I would normally combine probably some colors like that with a little bit greener colors. Just give it a little bit more of that iridescent look. Now let's get the brighter highlights on that. And I'm going to use this kind of very light greenish color. This one is Cherry Ludwig. So it's probably like in turquoise family, but very light color. And now I can start shaping up this little curly areas. Highlights on some, but before I put the highlight, I build up a little bit of mid value on it, so it's not just flat light color. And then some of those curly areas. Kind of coming out of the shadow a little bit more, and that will be the brighter light there, and even here. So it's kind of time to have fun with this, but not to overdo it at the same time. Because it's very easy to destroy what's, standing out as a highlight right now. Very easy to put too much, and before you know, everything is a highlight, and that means nothing is. Okay, let's bring some of the kind of lighter frothy color into this, and then just expand this up. Oops, too much. Now, when this happens, I can take my brush, that's bristle brush, and do something like this. And it's a brush that I don't use for anything else really, and I don't do oils, unfortunately. But if I did, and there was time when I did, but I just can't do that right now. No space. So if I did oils, I would still keep this one separate for specifically for this type of work, because it's nice, clean. And as far as the brush that I used for the underpainting, I don't use that one for anything like this either. So there are two separate dedicated brushes, and I like to have the bristle brush for this purpose because it just picks up the color rather than trying to blend it. The other one is more of a blender. So usually when I go for this brush, I'm trying to correct something, not trying to blend the colors. Okay, now let's just quickly get the color for, let's try with this. Just again, to indicate them first, like this stretches of foam. Again, I just picked up the hot pastel, but I just want to do it very lightly. And maybe I'll add kind of like an area right here with the foam, but not much. And you have to consider your foam design. Sometimes what you have in a picture works, sometimes it's just too much. So we kind of want to eliminate maybe some of it, and that color actually does work. So I can leave it like this, and then just maybe connect some of the areas here if I feel this should be. And then once that is done, if I want to make it lighter, I can come in, and actually that's just too bright, I think, for the area. I kind of try not to get my brightest contrast somewhere on the side too far. So maybe better to stick with something not as warm, because if you have predominantly cooler area and you put a warmer contrasting color into it, it's going to jump out a lot more than if it's a cooler color. So this is that edge again that I was talking about. Kind of got a little bit too much of this direct kind of line that just rises. I want to add a little bit more to it, to break it up maybe a little bit more. And having some other details, like something other than this sharp diagonal, helps to direct the eye away from it. Okay, and still it's kind of a little bit too flat. So maybe something like this. Also, I can kind of curve it under the shadow here, kind of with this, so it's not such a sharp edge. And as that foam gets more and more into shadow, oops, gets darker, the value gets darker. So that's how you can hide it there. And then the foam that's against that lighter color, I would use some kind of light purple. And that's why, again, that's why that purple, because if I just go with lighter blue on it, that just doesn't quite, let's say, use this. It does help a little bit, but it's still cooler color. But having at the same time like a hint of warmer color, it just adds that illumination to the inside. And then, like, I don't want to make the edges of that foam too sharp because they are in the shadow and it's kind of, I don't want to have them jumping out too much. So it kind of downplay the edges, keeping them softer, maybe less value contrast. And let's have one like right here to connect. Okay, if I want to add this same kind of blue a little bit here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just that foam spray, and before that I want to connect this edge kind of to this. So we see that it's, you know, another kind of curvature of the wave. So purples are really helpful when working this. Okay, for the spray, and like I say, I would do it normally later because I still have work to do on this, but I don't want to pin for like 3 hours to keep you waiting. So I would put more highlights, kind of get some of these resolved more, and definitely a little bit more of the background resolved before I do that. And what I'm using for the spray is the toothbrush, again dedicated to this. And same thing, I use the alcohol, the rubbing alcohol, isopropyl. And I'm going to use a Cherry Ludwig pastel. This is kind of very light yellow. So I just can do that, or I can take blue, but I want it kind of stand out more against here. So I think yellow is good. And what I'm doing is taking this and making it really wet. Then I'll take the pastel, make sure the bristles grab the color from it. And then after that, I'll just take, well, usually it helps maybe to cover a little bit the areas where you don't want it to go. I probably should protect the iPad at this point rather than the painting, but anyway, I will kind of push towards me with a finger and point at where I want it to go. So sometimes it's a bigger spray, sometimes it's smaller. There's like the whole practice to it, and see how it's like it got a lot here, and maybe it's not exactly what I wanted, but and the bigger droplets would have been better here. When it dries, you can still kind of go over, though it's not the best because you will be kind of showing that you're carving into that spray, but you can still correct it. And that's how the spray is done. And if the painting is large, I end up doing it once, kind of creating this mist, then doing a bit more of a volume with the spray, then I kind of go again and kind of add a little bit more. So it ends up being a couple of layers of spray, and in between, work in between. So let's see if I can just, and this, by the way, it's not ruined or anything. You can use it, just let it dry and it will be just fine. So here I would be just kind of trying to find those lighter areas, glazing that over. But overall, I remember that this area is darker than the foam, and the foam itself needs to be developed further. It should be lighter, so I can get the highlights on it at this point. Also, it gets pretty chunky, that foam. Sometimes it's just distracting. So sometimes I just layer a few more layers before it really gets looking more like I want, like kind of creating some of it smoother transition between the areas. Texture is good, but not everywhere, and sometimes it just makes the painting too busy. So if that happens, and if you need to kind of add more layers of color, again, right now I just picked up the harder pastel and did it with that. Maybe just a softer pastel as well. So here, this front row is kind of difficult sometimes, and particularly in the beginning when I was starting doing waves. It's really this part that was really difficult, and still takes time. Sometimes you have everything done and the wave is done and you like it, but that's the part that's driving you crazy, kind of. So it's because we don't have anything like really as a solid shape to work with. It's more of a kind of abstract pattern of wavelets, and it's requiring that design. Kind of need to design it. And I switched over where I actually was okay with it. Right, let's see what else. There's a interesting kind of highlight there that I think would be nice to get, because it just shows this split in their surface. And it also is a directional area, and this I have it prepared for the highlight, but I did not continue with that, so that also kind of start finishing up that area. And there's also here, it just happened to be, but there's also the reflections that this highlights are casting, and because the background was lighter than the painting, and it actually looks like it's reflecting. So something like that I would definitely try to keep, maybe having it more subtle, but kind of like this. And in other areas, like if there is very bright highlight at the top on the foam, it would reflect into the area below, and it just creates more connection of the foam with the foreground, which is not a bad thing, because when things are too separate, it's kind of unnatural. And somewhere you want to get that thin line kind of separating it. And then in other places, I want it lost, kind of merging with it. So I think I'm going to finish this, to stop here. I still kind of would love to get this better, but I know from experience it's gonna take some tweaking. So what I was saying before, I can still kind of come in if I want to do something with that. And it does feel like it should be a little bit darker or greener to show that there's a whole fringe of foam. And let's just very quickly try to indicate it, and then I'm done, whether I get it or not. So kind of adding some of that dark color. See, this is what I was talking about before. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. Does it happen? Yes, unfortunately. So I'm putting this darker green over quite light colors right now. And I guess just by applying lots of pressure, I still could achieve it. But then again, I don't go for this like really nice saturated dark in this area. All I really care for that it's just showing some depth there. So it's still working, but I've done this. Now I still need to get that light color in, otherwise that foam looks like it's a cutout. So I need to get in maybe like with this color on top of it and show that it still sits over that area. Maybe it was too light. Okay, the idea is to keep that darkness in some areas. Okay, so I'll leave it like this. And if I have time to finish it sometime later, I'll do that. If you feel like something is too big, it's kind of either you have to cover it up, sometime brush it off and layer. So it's kind of tricky. Once you have the foam, the mist, I wouldn't fuss with that so much. Sometimes it's just better to let it be rather than trying to, get those minor things worked around it. So, all right, I hope you liked it. And I should stop this. Okay. And now I'm going to switch to the other view. Question.
Sure.
So when you did your highlight, like the brightest of your highlight, did you just use white?
I don't know, like white is such a big
Right, so I wasn't sure.
yeah, it wasn't really white. I think it was I used a few different whites. One was like almost like white turquoise, another the spray I
Yeah.
did that was like really light yellow. It's just a really hint of yellow. Uh, those were Cherry Ludwig, and then the other really white. No, I think those were like the whitest colors I use.
Okay.
But there's a set. Art Spectrum has a set, and I don't remember the name, but something white. It has white in the name, and it has like different hints of more blue, more
Okay.
yellow, more orange, and those are amazing. I had a set, I'm still using it. So if you,
Okay.
they, mhm.
And then just one other question. When you put the pastel on your toothbrush,
Uh-huh.
was it a soft pastel?
Yeah, that was Cherry Ludwig. You need soft pastel because it needs to get that pigment on it. Otherwise, hard pastel is not going to do it. I think I also tried, those pen pastels. I tried that. I don't think it worked well. I don't remember. Maybe it was like really fine for that. I'm not sure. It didn't adhere well and didn't spread.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, Terry Ludwig seemed to work really well for that one. And sometimes I use more blue. If it's just against the blue, kind of like soft mist, it usually is more blue because it's thin. We see more of that blue through it because by itself, it's water, it's translucent. But like those bigger droplets, they do pick up more of that, brilliancy from the sun, so they do stand out.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just have one question.
Sure.
For the hard pastels, it seems like they're all kind of shaped a certain way. Do you like chisel them out or something to make them sharper or something? Oh,
No, they're actually just, the way I work on the side pretty much with whether it's thick pastel or thin pastel, I still end up working on the side most of the times. And they just end up being like skinnier and skinnier.
okay.
But I did chisel them once. Gosh, what's his name? The artist, he does portraits, and he was showing how he's sharpening his Alan Picard. He has a little video, and at that point, I was like, oh, maybe I will do portraits, and I just never got to it. But I had the pastels, and I chiseled them, and did all this, and I realized I don't use them that way ever. So it was a lot of work for nothing for me.
Okay.
And now we'll take a break and let's make it half hour.
I just have one question. The reference photo, this wave seems to be really unique in that it really is all green. I mean, there's like, this wave is just pure green and without any prominent blue in it. And of course, what you did was you made it very vibrant and alive with using the greens. But do you feel that this reference photo is pretty unusual, pretty unique in that way? That you're finding so many greens in it?
Actually, it's on Long Island. We do have a lot of green in the water, but yeah, like my greens in the highlights, like in the translucency, were brighter. And also, you should adjust for what you see on screen. Probably is brighter than what it is even on the paper. But yeah, I definitely have it probably warmer and a little bit brighter than it is. The only thing about the wave.
I love it. I love what you did with it. It's just that I just kind of felt like this reference photo was unique that it was so green, whereas a lot of turquoise and more blues and a lot of waves, but this one is predominantly green. I just kind of felt it was.
When you start your underpaintings, it's if you haven't done it before, make sure you kind of try the colors, maybe like the intensity of the color. Don't press too hard on the sanded paper with your pastel. And particularly if it's soft pastel, if those who don't have the hard pastels, just, have to do the soft pastels for underpainting. Just go very, very light because it dilutes very well. Whether it's water or alcohol, it's going to dilute. And some of those darker colors, they're just going to make it really dark. And then you just will be fighting, working on the dark surface when, if it's just the value closer to what you're aiming for, it's easier to establish that relationship.